This is Yakuza 3 Remastered. This is the third main entry in the series, and also, I guess, the fifth at this point to arrive on Xbox, and that is fantastic. So obviously we got Yakuza 0, 1, 2, those were Kiwami's, and also the Laika Dragon, so that's kind of exciting along the way. And this came as part of, well, basically 3 releases, 3, 4, and 5 being added to the console, which is quite exciting. And yes, I will be checking out every single entry in the series, so, stay tuned for that as well. On Xbox Series X, we're retaining the original release of this, which is like a 1080p 60 FPS. At least that's what they kind of note. They did mention in previous entries that it was slightly boosted, but I think that's mostly what we're getting here. With that, there is no auto HDR support at all. And yeah, it's still a really great experience. So this one's also really interesting because it's the only one really that hasn't been given a touch-up that we've seen released on the platform thus far. I mean, it was improved a little bit, but not to the degree that we've seen with, Kiwami 1, 2, or 0 as well. So it's a little bit different of a gameplay experience. Obviously, the characters look a little bit more bulky, as to say, from that era of gaming. It's just got a very different sort of style to it. And the game in general itself has a very unique kind of game play style in comparison to other Yakuza titles. So this is all footage from, I think, kind of like the first half of the overall game. There shouldn't be anything spoilerish because I want you to be able to jump in here and enjoy the adventures of Kairu-san. Basically spoiler-free to the best of my ability. So anyways, you're going through and you're battling, you're kind of like retired almost to a degree, I guess you could say. It's basically like uncle, you're playing the role of an uncle to an orphanage, and that's really a good chunk of the opening of this is you taking care of these kids, doing missions where you're like basically a parent to them. There's like a stealing situation, one where there's dating problems, there's like you go play baseball with them. It sounds weird, but if you're kind of invested in the character, I actually found it kind of interesting. At the same time, the pacing could have been a little bit better, just in regards to kind of getting the story along and really getting into, I guess you could say, the meat of the adventure where you kind of go back to a familiar area. But like I said, since this one isn't quite touched up as the other ones, it's very much a smaller scope and size. It's still got that level of detail that you're expecting. It's just not as massive of a game as you're seeing with those kind of improved titles. Anyways, it's still quite good. It's still fun. This one has more of a streamlined combat system with how you kind of progress and improve your skills. I did find it really, really tedious in regards to the blocking system in this one. Not for you, but for the AI, they just seem to excessively block everything. It's really annoying. It really, really is. As usual, there are multiple difficulty options. If you want the option to skip cutscenes, you actually need to turn that on during regular gameplay, so you go to settings and do that. With that, I usually play it just on easy, honestly. I mean, I find these kind of brawling games a little grindy and a little tiring, a little Yakuza series, so I just enjoy it that way more. There's no shame in it, honestly, as long as you want to just kind of jump in here and enjoy the story. I think that makes it a lot more accessible. And yeah, it can be quite difficult. And if you want to improve the difficulty more, totally cool, right? Enjoy it the way you want to. Anyways, it's a neat entry in the series. I did find it to be quite fun, and it kind of just carried forward the story of this character that I have actually become really quite invested in, which is interesting. I should also mention that, weirdly enough, on this one, there was like a level of stuttering present in the opening hour or so, if that makes sense. Like, Yakuza games are very long if you're not familiar with that, but it was weird. It was just like it was showing up during cutscenes and during gameplay, and then I reached a certain point and I guess I got like a save or something going, but then it's been perfectly 100% smooth the whole way through. So I don't know if it was just some kind of weird hiccup with my machine or something weird was going on, but it was bizarre. It was like this just crazy stuttering. It was pretty bad. I was like, what is going on here? And then you know, I didn't have it another time since. I was just like, this is odd. I thought it was worth mentioning in case somebody else is playing and wondering about that. I thought it would be worth mentioning. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. So, you know, we've got this main character here, but there are, of course, supporting characters as well. And yeah, it's definitely a little bit of a different setup, okay? Because the most part of it really is, I guess at least the heart of this one is you interacting with this obviously slightly aged girl, if you've noticed that. I mean, there's the other orphans that you're taking care of, cooking food for, doing random errands. And then, of course, there are so many different sub-stories that you can jump into, which are like side quests that you can play. They're quirky, weird. And this game is stacked with mini-games. Oh, wow, there are a lot to do. Obviously, you know, you got things like karaoke, but there's like, you go golfing, there's like darts, there's... I'm trying to think of some other weird ones I did. There, like, the golfing one was like built into the story, and I was like, oh, I did not expect to really be going golfing. Oh, and there's like a baseball scene. It's just like they got some really weird sort of kind of mini games, and that's the storyline a lot in this one. I find that really fascinating. You'll be playing, and then bam, it's like 6 months later or a year later or something like that. So that's also rather interesting, just in terms of how that, you know, kind of feeds into the overall experience. So this one, obviously, I think is, you know, they're all important to kind of get the full story of this character, especially if you find yourself, like, we're looking at the Xbox platform specifically, so you've likely taken a look at the other ones, and I do suggest you actually jump in and play 0, 1, 2, 3 if you can. And you've probably, you know, if you have and you're looking at this one, you've probably been invested with the character, and this is an important sort of next step for the character, just in understanding who he is and, you know, kind of his motives as we get closer and closer towards the conclusion of his tale, which is kind of neat. And yeah, I do think this one is important. At the same time, I think it might be one of the weaker ones in the game series. Like, it's not, like, I like it a lot. I've been having a great time with it. I've been enjoying working through it. But at the same time, it's like, wow, it takes a while to get going in this one. You definitely feel that sort of kind of slowness going on, if you get what I mean. And then also on top of that, you know, you look at the visuals, which I still think look really good, you know, look really clean. The characters and stuff also are decently well done. It's just kind of like, I don't know, it feels very aged, if that makes sense. And it looks kind of aged, just in comparison to how clean we've seen the other, you know, titles release on the platform, where they've really touched them up and stuff. But just keep in mind, like, this is like remastered, but it's not to the degree that we've seen the other ones done, and you're gonna feel that and see that in the game. I still think it looks fantastic. I still think the level of detail in this is great. I still really enjoy what this has to offer. I think it's quite a lot of fun. It's really dramatic, just because, like, I don't know if I really got that across, but, like, tonally it feels like a very different game, but it's still got the same heavy style of combat and honor and conflict. And this is just like a side thing that I threw in here because I thought it might be neat to kind of see some of the weird stuff that pops up. And some of the stuff reoccurs too. If you go forward, you take the time to really explore these cities, because there's like countless hours of gameplay you can have if you choose to really take in the worlds. And this one, again, is kind of special because a lot of this kind of takes place in a different location. It's not like the city you're used to. You're in this, like, completely unique, almost tropical type place, I want to say, as weird as that sounds. Okinawa. It's really neat as you're, you know, dealing with this orphanage situation where you're trying to, you know, take care of these kids. And then on top of that, there's, of course, the looming long-term responsibility that you found yourself thrust into, that you have to deal with, right? Like, these responsibilities, you feel them on, as you as a character jumping into this role, you feel that responsibility of, wow, things are not going well for the group behind us, and, you know, sometimes you gotta jump back into the fold and try to put things together. It's very neat, and it's just gonna feel a little dumbed down mechanically sometimes, and I say that for, like, the combat and stuff. And, oh, again, that blocking from the enemies is just, like, exhausting. Like, I'm trying to get through to the next part, and it's just like block, and you're like, oh. So you gotta kind of rely, at least I noticed, a lot more on, like, weapons and tools that you are finding along the way, and I think that's kind of neat too, that it's going to mix things up a bit. But, you know, I don't think it's necessarily the best title to jump into if this is your first Yakuza experience. I think you might be a little bit lost in the story. I think you could jump in and you would be able to get an understanding. I mean, they got some good summary stuff kind of in here to give you an idea of what happened. But at the same time, I think you're going to benefit a lot more about caring for this character and the characters around him if you are invested from the earlier titles. And yeah, I think that's kind of a neat thing to kind of mention. And I was under the impression that we were going to get some sort of additional boost to the game from when I was talking to PRs back when the Series X was arriving, because they were, you know, obviously we knew for a while that the rest of the series was coming. So I had held off on checking out the earlier Yakuza titles on this console, because, you know, I checked them out on 1X, and, well, I wanted to show them off again on, obviously, you know, the Series X, because I like this franchise. I'm really into it. I think it's really great. You know, the restored content, the improved localization. It's definitely an interesting story to go on. I think this overall journey is definitely worthwhile, and I think this one's kind of fun too. I mean, the combat, you know, while it feels a little bit more grindy, it's still pretty rewarding to smash folks' face in and stuff like that. You know, stuff along there is just kind of, you know, it's weird, it's intense, it's grueling, it's brutal, but at the same time, it's, like, really funny and quirky. Like, this is a mission here where this is a main mission where we've got to take care of, like, a dog that, you know, we're trying to, I guess, technically adopt on top of the orphans we're dealing with. And I think that particular element of it is going to be really weird for a lot of people. I like the change of pace that this kind of provided, but at the same time, I was also yearning to get back into the heavy city that we're used to, the location and the place that we've, you know, that's become familiar. You know, in the past titles, the later titles, you visit lots of different locations, right? But there's always the core street that you love, always the core street that you know, and it's just, like, really fascinating, because there's not too many franchises out there that have had this many entries that follow the same character. It's really neat, because you really do kind of feel like you're experiencing the entirety of this character's life, and I think that's really quite worthwhile, because again, I can't think of too many where you really feel like you're in a chronological timeline of seeing this character go from this, you know, young kind of individual that is really inexperienced and is making their way to this continuously older and older individual, and you'll see that especially as we get towards the Song of Life, obviously, where you really get to feel the full sense of scope of the character. And I know I'm getting a little off topic for, you know, specifically Yakuza 3, but I think the context matters too, because this might be the first time that you're taking a look at what Yakuza has to offer on the Xbox platform, and I think that's kind of important to know as well, just like the sense that these stories do stack on one another, and they do build up towards a long-lasting legacy. But of course, as per usual, hours of side things you can do, so many different characters you could meet, random events that you could take place in, locker stuff, collectibles, items to gather. It's just, the combat system's different, the game looks a little bit different, but the story and everything like that feels decently consistent with what's happening before. But you are going to feel like it's wildly different if you're coming from the last, from Kiwami 2, because it's going to be like, it'll feel as though everything just, like, slowed right down. The action starts to get intense. There's, like, some insane action moments once you, like, the ball gets rolling. I think around chapter 5, maybe the end of 4, things start to get a little bit wild. 4, 5, 6, the chapters, because stuff starts really picking up. It's just a slow opening, and I think that was mostly to provide context further into who this individual is, and to give you some more calmer moments with it. At the same time, I do kind of think this is one of those weaker entries in the series because of a number of things, you know, like the combat with the blocking, the simplicity of it, the models not being quite as, like, fine-tuned in regards to the other ones, unless he's just super bulky and buff all of a sudden, but I don't know. Anyways, it's still good, it's still great, it's looking fine, it's playing really well, except for that weird bit that I experienced at the beginning. You might not, I'd love to hear if others have faced off against that, but yeah, just weird. And it loads, like, really fast. It's almost instantly in every segment. It goes and flows very well. And that's Yakuza 3 Remastered. Look forward to the rest of the series from me.